The snow had no mercy in daylight. It took the sun and threw it back at human eyes until the world looked washed clean of shadows, white everywhere, hard glare, the kind that made distance lie. They were pinned on the ridgeline like dark stitches on a sheet. The first hit didn't sound like a rifle. It sounded like the absence of sound, the moment before thunder, when you know something has changed but your body hasn't decided how to react. The poor man's knee buckled. He folded as if the ground had been removed. There was no flash, no obvious report, no signature anyone could point to and say, "There." The snow around his boots puffed once, then his head dropped forward, and the line stuttered with the shock of it. "Contact," the commander began, but the rest of the call died under wind and sudden confusion. Someone shouted a direction that might have been real or might have been panic trying to become useful. They tried to look up, slope, down, across the basin. It all looked the same. White glare, dark rock ribs, broken drifts. Nowhere to disappear. A second later, the geometry of the trap revealed itself. Fire snapped from the higher ground, tight, angled, coming not from one place but two, overlapping lanes like scissors. Enfilade. The ridgeline turned into a ruler laid across their bodies. If they stayed flat, round skimmed the crust and found gaps. If they rose even an inch, it was like stepping into a pencil line drawn by someone who'd pre-measured. The commander dug his face into the snow, tried to get a grid out, tried to talk to anyone not trapped inside this bright bowl of wind. "Overwatch. This is," he keyed his radio. Static answered. Not the normal hiss of mountains and distance. This was harder, rude, as if a fist had been shoved into the frequency. He changed channels. Static. He tried the satellite handset. It blinked, tried to handshake, failed, blinked again. The air itself felt crowded, as if the ridge had become a wall against sound. A burst of fire cut the next thought short. Down the line, an operator shifted his elbow, just to reset his weight, just to breathe, and a single shot cracked the snow beside his sleeve with surgical timing. Not a volley, not suppressive fire. A warning, precise as a teacher tapping a desk with a ruler. "Sniper," someone muttered. It wasn't a guess. It was a verdict. But the sniper didn't shoot like a sniper anyone wanted. No cadence, no hurry, no drama, only punishment for movement, as if the shooter had decided they could wait forever and would rather let panic do the work. The corpsman crawled, belly pressed to ice, dragging a wounded operator by the harness. The man's leg was already soaked through. Blood on white made a color that looked too bright to be real. The corpsman tried to tuck him behind a thin berm of wind-packed snow, the kind that felt solid until you remembered bullets didn't care about your feelings. Rounds snapped through the drift, shaving powder off the far side, and the berm became less cover than an insult. "Keep pressure on it," the corpsman said, voice calm on purpose. His hands moved like a practiced ritual. Clamp, pack, tighten. The wounded man's breath came out in harsh, fogged bursts. Every exhale looked like time leaking away. The designated marksman lifted his optic, trying to find the long shooter. He scanned for shimmer, for a glint, for any betrayal of glass. Nothing. The light was too flat. The wind was too clean. Whoever was out there had discipline and patience, the kind that made you feel watch without ever seeing eyes. Out of range, the commander snapped, more to his own people than to the mountain. "Don't chase ghosts. Focus on the nearer threats. Save ammo. Controlled fire." It was a command and a comfort. If the sniper was too far, then it was a problem for later. If the sniper was too far, then the team could keep the fight simple. Close threats, fixed lanes, get out. But simple didn't exist here. Someone tried a micro-move, 2 feet to the right, just to get behind a darker rib of rock. The sniper answered immediately. Another operator dropped, not dead, but damaged in a way that stole options. A shoulder hit, a soundless collapse, a flinch that turned into a chaos. The shooter was counting them, studying their habits, their patterns, punishing predictability like it was a lesson. The commander took another look at the basin below. The only nearby extraction point was a small, flat patch near a jagged saddle where the terrain softened enough for rotors. They'd been told the aircraft would have a narrow window. Daylight weather was fickle here. Winds could knife sideways without warning. Clouds could crawl over peaks and turn visibility into a smay. If they missed it, they were stuck. If they were stuck, this ridge became a grave with a view. Bird can only hold at the LZ a few minutes, the commander said into the broken noise, as if stating it would bend reality. We need to move. We need. The static chewed his words again. At the very back of the element, half hidden by a rock rib and the way she seemed to fold herself smaller than the world, a quiet figure lay still. She didn't argue. She didn't add noise. She watched the slope with the focus of someone reading a problem set under fire. Her rifle looked wrong for this place. Heavy, deliberate, built not for the close chaos but for certainty at distance. The wind pressed snow against her cheek. Her breathing stayed controlled, almost invisible. The commander, pinned in his own lane of snow, glanced back and saw her eyes, and for a moment he looked like he wanted to say something sharp. Something about protocol, about attachment, about the obvious futility of shooting at what no one could even see. Before he could, the nearer fire tightened. One of the high ground positions shifted, trying to pinch their line. An RPG thumped somewhere with a hollow cough, the sound swallowed by wind but the explosion loud in the body. Snow erupted in a white fountain that fell back like torn paper. Then, in the middle of violence, there was a half-heartbeat where the enemy fire stopped. Not because they were done, not because they were merciful, because something had changed on their side of the equation. A single crack arrived late. Wrong rhythm, wrong direction. It didn't match the close fire. It sounded like it had traveled a long way through cold air, arriving with a delay that made the mind struggle to connect cause to effect. Far off, beyond the basin and the ribbed rock, there was a collapse no one in the team could see, only a faint, distant thud that might have been a body or a piece of equipment or a rock dislodged by something more precise than weather. The pressure slackened. The enfilade didn't disappear, but it loosened like a fist unclenching. The team inhaled at the same time, not knowing why they'd been allowed oxygen. The commander stayed back at the quiet figure again. His eyes narrowed, not accusing but baffled, as if he'd watched someone bend a rule he believed was made of iron. She was already reloading, calm, as if physics had simply done what it always did when you respected it. Hours earlier, before the ridge became a bright cage, they'd gathered in a cold forward site where everything smelled of fuel, plastic, and coffee that had given up pretending to be hot. The sky outside was the deep blue of pre-dawn, and the air bit at exposed skin as if it took personal offense at warmth. The briefing was clean and clipped. A remote sensor relay sat on a high plateau, tied into an early warning network that had been feeding the enemy visibility on movement through the region. The task was daylight, reckon, and disable. In, confirm, disrupt, out. The kind of mission that sounded simple until you drew the terrain. The commander stood over a map with a red marker line that looked too neat. He was experienced, confident, and deliberate, by the book in a way that usually kept people alive. He didn't romanticize fights. He didn't gamble on miracles. He'd seen too many just one more minute decisions turn into memorial slides. We're not chasing stories, he said when someone joked about long shots and legends. We're doing a job. There was a new attachment to the element, a sniper our observer brought in as overwatch support. She stood to the side, gear laid out with methodical order, fingers moving over equipment like a pianist checking keys before a concert. She spoke little. Her reputation, whispered in hallways and locker rooms, was that she didn't waste language. She checked weather more than she talked. She wrote notes that looked like math. Some of the operators made assumptions the way people do when they don't know what to do with someone different. A comment about optics. A comment about someone upstairs. The kind of half-joke that tried to make discomfort into humor. She heard it. Her face didn't change. She didn't correct anyone. She did what she always did, prepared. In the intel package, the guard element looked small. The sensor relay sat in a place the enemy would want protected, but the reports suggested routine, not obsession. A few sentries, a couple firing points, nothing that screamed trap. She'd asked one question during the brief, voice low enough that it didn't compete with the commander's cadence. "Comms dead zones," she said. This basin, hey, what's the plan if we lose Link? The commander's eyes flicked to the comms overlay, then back. Unlikely. Altitude and weather limit their ability to jam. Terrain masking, maybe, but we'll have line of sight. He wasn't dismissive out of ego. He was dismissive because he'd seen too many people spiral into hypothetical fear. He believed in plans because plans created discipline, and discipline kept people alive. She didn't push. She simply marked the basin with a small dot in her mind. During prep, her gear anchors stood out to anyone paying attention. Heavy rifle system. Wind meter. Dope card sealed against moisture. Extra batteries tucked in redundant pouches. Not because she loved weight, but because she'd learned the hard way that electronics failed when you needed them. She carried a backup sighting method. Old school. Analog. Reticle subtensions. Memory. Experience. Daylight glare kills more shots than distance, she'd murmured to no one in particular as she taped a small strip over a reflective buckle. On infiltration, the snow was bright enough to hurt. Even with eye protection, the world looked like it wanted to erase detail. Their footprints were unavoidable, dark ovals stamped into white, a trail that said, here we are, here we went, here we will be. The wind kept changing, pushing sound around so that distance lied about direction. As they moved, she watched for small truths the map didn't show. Drift patterns, exposed rock that suggested wind corridors, areas where snow had been disturbed too recently to be weather. And she noticed inconsistencies that didn't belong to routine guarding. Tracks too clean. Supply caches placed with repetition, like someone building a habit. A dead ball in the comms mapping exactly where the approach line narrowed. At one point, while the others checked sectors, she let her gaze climb to a distant rock face. Something caught the light. Just once, a thin reflective thread. It could have been ice. It could have been nothing. It could have been lens cloth and sun. She filed it away like a puzzle piece that might matter later. When they reached the objective area, the evidence shifted from suspicion to intent. Lead firing positions, pre-sighted lanes that overlapped the shallow basin, rock notches that offered cover and command of angles. This didn't look like a place someone guarded. It looked like a place someone waited. A jammer source was likely nearby. Not confirmed, but implied. An odd stillness on the comms test, a flicker in the signal strength that coincided with the basin's shape. The commander saw the same clues and still made the call to press forward. Time pressure had a way of becoming self-imposed. If they hit the relay quickly, disrupt it, and move, maybe the trap wouldn't close. She lingered half a step behind as they moved, eyes always returning to high ground, as if she could already see the shape of the ambush like a shadow in the snow. When the basin bit, it did so in full daylight. A coordinated first volley pinned them exactly where cover was thinnest. Rounds snapped through drift and ricocheted off rock with angry sparks that were almost invisible in sun. The team flattened, trying to become smaller than geometry allowed. Communications collapsed hard. Primary radios filled with static that had teeth. The satellite link failed to handshake, blinking like a dying heartbeat. It felt less like random interference and more like someone stepping on them on purpose. Every attempt to transmit seemed to trigger a pulse of noise, as if an unseen hand was listening for the moment they tried to reach out and then slamming the door. "Gemma," the commander said, and the word tasted like a problem he didn't want. He tried to switch frequencies again. No clean link. No overwatch corrections. No reassurance from the outside world. The kill zone geometry became explicit. High-angle fire from the ridge crest. A shooter far enough back to be nearly invisible, firing only when movement offered a predictable line. It wasn't just lethal. It was controlling. The enemy wasn't merely trying to kill. They were trying to dictate behavior. Casualties stacked. A leg hit that slowed movement. A shoulder hit that turned a rifle into deadweight. The corpsman's hands never stopped. Every medical action felt like theft, stealing seconds from death while someone tried to steal seconds back with bullets. Ammo began to matter in a way it never did in training. Suppressing uphill 8 magazines fast. Barrels heated, and heat in cold air made optics lie. Leaders called for controlled bursts, for discipline, for breath. Panic fought discipline like a second enemy. Visibility degraded in a daytime way that felt insulting. Wind gusts kicked Powder into brief curtains, momentary whiteouts that blinded them for half-seconds at a time. The glare made even dark rock look pale, as if everything was trying to disappear. The commander tried a standard play, smoke and bound. Smoke and wind became a smay. Instead of hiding them, it drew attention, painting their silhouettes as moving shadows in a white world. The enemy sniper punished the first attempt, and the team froze again, pinned by the invisible tax on motion. Enemy precision revealed motive clues. They prioritized radios. Anyone who touched a handset got a round snap close, like a warning to stop trying. Leaders took near misses that forced them to tuck their heads. Anyone who shifted toward the sensor relay drew fire with a certainty that suggested the enemy knew exactly what mattered. A second enemy element appeared, an RPG team working angles, trying to crack shallow cover and force a route into the basin center. Explosions tore snow into the air, sending ice fragments like shrapnel. The beam that had been a thin insult became a thinner one. The commander acknowledged the long-range shooter again, but the same conclusion held. Out of range, he said, clipped. We can't solve that right now. Knee threats. Focus. She watched pattern instead of reacting to pain. The sniper's timing wasn't random. It fired after certain cues, a hand signal, a shift of weight, a radio attempt, as if someone was feeding the shooter information, cueing the punishment with a godlike view. Then, under the wind, she heard it, a faint hum, intermittent, high and hard to place. Not loud enough to dominate, but present enough to scrape the nerves. A small drone, somewhere above the glare, using altitude and light as camouflage. It passed, the hum fading, then returned. Enemy was counter-hunting. This wasn't defense. It was a trap designed to isolate, control, maybe even capture. The thought slid cold into the back of the mind. Time pressure spiked. A distorted check-in from extraction came through in broken fragments, late, warped by interference. A nearby LZ was viable only for minutes before weather shifted. If they missed it, they were stuck. If they were stuck, nightfall would bring more enemies, more angles, more control. The team couldn't win a stand-up fight here. They could only survive by changing the geometry. She made the choice without drama. While the others held, while the commander tried to keep the line from unraveling, she slipped. At first it was barely movement. An inch, a shoulder tucked, a slide behind a rock rib when the wind kicked Powder into the air. She used the glare and gust as cover instead of fighting them. She moved when the drone hum passed overhead, when the enemy's attention shifted to an RPG blast, when the world itself made noise. The commander saw her start and hissed, "No. Stay. Protocol." She didn't look back. She kept her body low, made herself part of the terrain. When she did speak, it was soft, carried on wind like something the mountain might have said. "If we stay," she said, "we bleed out. If I move, we change the math." He wanted to refuse. Everything in him was built on team integrity, on staying together, on never splitting into smaller pieces that could be swallowed. But the ridge was already swallowing them. The wounded man's blood was turning the snow into a clock. The enemy was counting their options and punishing predictability. He swallowed the protest, because another choice was wise. She climbed an impossible route, a narrow rock spine draped with cornices that could shear under weight. Each step risked noise, slide, silhouette. She moved with micropauses, reading the mountain the way others read maps. Her rifle was heavy enough to make every shift a negotiation. Ammo for precision was limited. She wasn't carrying a belt of solutions, only a handful. And her comms were dead. No spotter voice. No corrections. No outside help. A battery indicator flickered once on a device clipped to her gear, an ugly reminder that electronics didn't care about courage. She killed unnecessary systems, shut down anything that might glow or die at the wrong time. She relied on analog references, her dope card, sealed against moisture, and the geometry in her head. Wind was not one thing here. It was layers. Spindrift peeled off rock edges, showing fast currents. Snow ribbons drifted low in the basin, showing slower crosswinds. Powder lifted in fine veils at mid-height, showing turbulence. She watched all of it, building a mental profile of what a bullet would have to survive. The drone threat grew. The hum became more frequent, as if the enemy realized something had shifted. She timed movement between its passes, staying in shadowed folds where the sun couldn't flatten her into a silhouette. At one point she stopped, pressed close to stone, and saw something that didn't match weather. A pocket of dead calm, where snow didn't drift the way it should, as if heat or disturbance was changing airflow. A faint line, antenna-like, barely visible against rock. A jammer position, hidden not just by terrain but by the way it broke the wind. She didn't shoot it yet. She kept climbing, because a bad angle was worse than no shot. She needed line of sight into the enemy's layered positions. She needed distance to become an advantage instead of a joke. As she moved, an old memory pressed against her ribs like a bruise. Not a full flashback, not a movie, just a sharp sensory thing, being dismissed once before, speaking up and being waved off, then watching someone pay for the decision. Or Weiss, being told later that her voice had made her a problem, and being sidelined when she could have helped. She'd learned then what arguing did in rooms where people already had their story. She'd learned to let results talk, to let the shot be the argument. She reached a precarious perch where the rock spine gave her a slice of view across the basin. From here, the enemy positions resolved into something readable. She could see the laid firing points, the lanes they'd cut, the way they used sun and shadow. She could also see a notch in rock that never took direct glare, a pocket that stayed dark even at noon. Clean lane, minimal signature, a place a disciplined long shooter could hide and feel safe. 2.4 kilometers wasn't one shot. It was a chain of decisions. Wind, temperature, elevation, light, the way cold air carried sound late. And she would have no feedback. No spotter to say, impact low, adjust. No comms corrections. No second chances. She laid out her ritual like a checklist. Breathing cadence. Trigger prep. Elevation solution dialed to the edge of trust. Wind hold not guessed but timed. Waiting for the lull that came like a heartbeat in the gust cycle. She did not rush, because rushing here was just another form of ego. Below, the team fought for seconds. The corpsman's hands were slick with blood. The commander's orders stayed clipped, trying to keep discipline alive. The enemy tightened, trying to force them into the basin where cameras could film a route. She built a target ladder, not for glory but for effect. First, the jammer node. Because restoring comms didn't just help her, it changed everyone's odds. It collapsed coordination. It returned their ability to call, to time, to move like a unit instead of a collection of pinned bodies. Second, the long shooter and whatever fed it, sniper or spotter, drone Q, the invisible tax on movement. Third, the RPG team, because explosions broke cover and made wounded bleed faster. Fourth, any leader or runner directing shifts, because cohesion was a machine, and machines failed when the right gear broke. Fifth, any crew-served gunner that was pinning lanes. She chose the first. The jammer position was small, almost insulting, a hint of antenna line, a device tucked into rock as if the mountain itself had grown a tooth. She ranged it with reticle subtensions and known dimensions, cross-checked against the map memory from briefing. Her fingers made the elevation adjustment with reverence, not doubt. The wind lulled, not silent, never silent, but softer, a thin opening. She pressed the trigger. The shot did not announce itself immediately. At this distance, sound and impact were divorced by time. The rifle gave a controlled recoil into her shoulder, and then there was only waiting, breath held in a calm that felt almost like prayer. Down below, the team would later say they felt it before they understood it. The half-heartbeat where enemy fire stopped. As if someone had to reassess a world that changed unexpectedly. Then the distant crack arrived late. Wrong rhythm, wrong direction, followed by a far-off collapse no one could see. Static on the net cleared in bursts, like a storm breaking. The commander keyed his radio, and for the first time in long seconds, his own voice came back clean enough to be real. Net's back, someone said, disbelief in the syllables. Enemy fire lost rhythm. The tight geometry loosened. A lane that had been a ruler became an argument. She used the restored comms sparingly. No speeches, no drama, only essential call-outs, a direction, a timing cue, a warning about the drone. "They'll adjust," she said, voice flat. "Move now." She shifted to the second priority, the rock notch that stayed dark. She watched for betrayal, a tiny movement in shadow, a brief lens glint that looked like the reflective thread she'd noticed hours earlier. The shooter wasn't alone. Something moved near the notch. Spotter, handler, someone feeding cues. The drone hum sharpened, committing toward her perch as if drawn by the sudden hole in their control. She steadied anyway. The enemy shooter tried to reposition, perhaps sensing their jammer was compromised, perhaps trying to find her. The movement was small, careful, but distance magnified consequence. She timed another lull, held for wind, pressed. Again the delay, again the waiting that felt like hanging over a cliff. Below, the movement tax vanished. Someone shifted and wasn't punished. The team breathed again, not because the mountain was kind, but because the long shooter had been removed from the math. Enemy adaptation came fast. The drone committed to her location, the hum growing like an insect becoming a threat. A small climber element began moving along the rock spine, using the same route she'd taken, because the enemy was learning her language, geometry. Her ammo for precision was low now. Her position was burned. Wind shifted harder, gusts biting at her holds. Below, her team was still exposed, still in danger of being pinned again if the enemy regained cohesion. Instead of staying to duel, she relocated a few meters to a secondary micro-position she'd pre-selected during the climb, a notch behind a darker rib where the sun couldn't flatten her. It wasn't a grand maneuver. It was two careful steps that might save her life. From a new angle, she saw the RPG team preparing to fire into the thin berm where the wounded lay. The launcher lifted, the operator trying to judge wind and range. She didn't hesitate. One shot, a clean interruption. The launcher dipped, useless, and the explosive threat died before it could add another fountain of snow and shrapnel to the ridge. With comms back, the SEAL element exploited the opening. The commander's voice steadied, now that it could be heard. "Smoke on my mark. Wait for wind. Don't chase. Bound on cue." They timed it correctly this time, using the wind rather than fighting it. Smoke drifted across the enemy's sight lines in a way that hid movement instead of highlighting it. Operators bounded in disciplined pairs, covering each other, dragging wounded with desperate efficiency. The corpsman moved like someone with no spare thoughts, only tasks. Enemy tried to reassert control with heavier volume. Impacts bracketed the ridge like someone throwing angry stones. A thump here, a crack there, a spray of snow that stung faces and filled mouths with ice. It showed planning, led ambush, contingency. They hadn't expected their control package to be broken so quickly. She searched for cohesion, the person directing shifts. It wasn't always the loudest. It was often the one moving between positions, carrying a radio, pointing, signaling, pulling the machine together when it faltered. If she could break that, the enemy would become individuals instead of a system. She found him by behavior, someone who moved when others stayed, who stepped into lanes without fear because he believed the long shooter and the jammer made him untouchable. He was near a rock outcrop, gesturing sharply, trying to push the climbers faster, trying to ret-ask fire. She held for wind, elevated with trust she'd earned in less forgiving places. Pressed. The delay came and went. Then, even at distance, she saw the change, a sudden slackening, a gesture cut short, movement that turned from purposeful to confused. The enemy line faltered. Fire became scattered. Coordination frayed like cloth. Below, the team's withdrawal became possible. They moved toward the LZ in a long, hard-bound line, smoke and wind and discipline making space where there had been none. But the climbers were still coming. The drone circled, searching. Its hum passed overhead, then returned, persistent. A glint of movement on the rock spine told her the enemy had decided she mattered now. She could not be rescued if she was pinned. The team could not turn back without risking the wounded and the entire element. She had to rescue herself. She broke contact the way she'd climbed, using terrain folds, timing, and the mountain's own noise. She moved when gusts hit. She froze when the drone passed. She slid into shadow, into rock seams, into places where a body could become a detail. She did not shoot unless she had to. Every shot was a signature. Every shot was a beacon. Once, a climber's boot scraped rock close enough that she felt it in her teeth. She held still, rifle hugged tight, breath reduced to nothing. The climber paused, searching. The drone hum dipped, like it too was listening. A gust slammed the ridge. Powder blasted sideways, turning the world briefly into white static. She used that instant the way she'd used the first one. Moved, low and fast, into a new fold of stone. Minutes later, longer than minutes, shorter than a lifetime, she dropped into the terrain near the LZ. The team was already there, forming a perimeter, wounded scented, smoke thinning under overwatch. The aircraft came in with urgency, blades chopping bright air, snow erupting under it like a living thing. The world became noise and powder and shouted hand signals. The team loaded fast. The commander counted heads with eyes that refused to lie. She appeared through the storm of overwatch like she'd been there all along, face crusted with ice, breathing steady, rifle held like a truth. No one cheered. No one had the kind of energy that wasted itself on theatrics. They simply made room, pulled her in, and the aircraft lifted away from the ridgeline that had tried to erase them. Inside, the noise softened enough for thoughts to return. The wounded man's breath was still ragged, but he was alive. The corpsman kept working, hands never stopping. The commander sat across from her, helmet off, eyes tired in a way that didn't belong to sleep. He didn't apologize with words. He reached into his kit, pulled out his own water, and handed it to her without ceremony. A small gesture, almost nothing. But in a world where respect was often loud, it was the loudest thing he could do. She took it, nodded once, and drank as if water was just another necessity, not a symbol. Back at base, the debrief room felt too warm, as if heat itself was suspicious. The intel pieces that had seemed routine now looked like a story with a different ending. The sensor relay hadn't been the prize. It had been bait. The enemy wanted a propaganda capture or kill, specifically of a commander, a proof of reach. They wanted to test response time, to see how quickly a unit could be isolated, pinned, filmed, and finished. The jammer and drone package confirmed it. A control ambush. Isolate the net. Punish movement. Force a predictable route. Record it. Use it. Her earlier details were validated one by one. The two clean tracks. The repeated caches. The dead zone placed like a trapdoor. The reflective thread. Lens management. Deliberate concealment. A tiny betrayal of discipline caught by an eye trained to see intent in snow. Someone asked her why she hadn't argued harder at the brief. She didn't give them the full story. She didn't need to. The room already knew the answer in the way people looked at her now. Not as an attachment, not as a box checked, but as a part of the machine that had kept them alive. Still, later, when the commander updated procedures, his voice carried a different weight. Never dismiss range outright. Never ignore quiet warnings. Map dead zones as threats, not inconveniences. Assume control packages, not just rifles. The cost was named without romance. One operator evacuated in bad shape. Others would carry scars, visible and not. Survival wasn't triumph. It was simply not dying in a place designed to make dying look inevitable. Outside, daylight lay on snow again, innocent and blinding. Back in the quiet of the gear area, she cleaned her rifle with careful hands. Oil, cloth, metal made honest by maintenance. Around her, others talked louder than before. Stories, jokes, the nervous human need to fill silence after hearing too much of it. But when they spoke now, they spoke with her included. Not as a novelty, not as a shadow, as someone whose function had rewritten the room. She didn't smile much. She didn't need to. She let the cleaning be its own kind of calm, the black ink of oil on a white world, a reminder that what saved them hadn't been a miracle. It had been a decision chain, held steady under wind and glare, in a place where the mountain tried to erase every human assumption. Until one quiet shot made the enemy, for the first time, have to reassess.